This is really, I think, a major step in the evolution of Wisdom 2.0 to branch out into how the wisdom and how a lot of these practices hit the ground. And I don't think there's anything that's closer to those of us as Americans, those of us who are engaged as coaches and trainers and business people in the world, than what the last decade has done and what has happened to so many of our fellow citizens. And I think ultimately we will be judged as a society on how we respond to what has happened in the last 10 years to a lot of our veterans that have come back. So if we could first give a big round of applause, not just to these veterans, but to all the men and women who have served our country over the last few years. So today we have three very special people who will share with us their stories, and I just want to start with Jared, who is closest to me right now, physically. I mean, we're all close. And just kind of share with everybody, you know, where you come from and where you served and how long you served and a little bit about your story.
Hello, everybody. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I served in the Marine Corps for 9 years. Thank you. Very proud of to be a Marine and of my service. I started off serving 6 years in the reserves, stationed in Richmond, Virginia. It was an artillery unit, and then we got activated, and they didn't need us to do artillery, so they told us, you're going to be going to Iraq, but we don't know what you're going to be doing yet. So we went to Iraq, and we did convoy security in Fallujah for between 2005 and 2006. And it was a very intense time in Iraq.
Fallujah was one of the toughest spots in the entire
the Al-Anbar province
campaign.
Yep. Pretty much every time we went out on a mission, which was every day or every other day, we were finding roadside bombs, hopefully finding them before they exploded. So that was quite interesting and very awakening for an American who took his life for granted, took all the things that I have and all the opportunities and the safety and my education, and just, you didn't realize that there were places like this and people living like this, and didn't realize that there were places where you weren't safe driving down the highway. I mean, it looked similar to the highway here, but there's a whole lot different inside the vehicle between us. And so I served in 2005 and 2006, and we all made it back home. Thank goodness. I'm very thankful. There were some very close calls. I walked right up to a roadside bomb because I was going to get Red Bull and cigarettes from the vehicle in front of me. Those are the types of things that we were using to keep us awake. And I walked right up on a roadside bomb and stared at it. And don't remember much of it. I didn't remember that time really until later on in my life when I realized that I probably had a type of freeze response during that, and dealt with a lot of nightmares and anxiety when it came to driving, and some issues going forward. And I think that kind of led me to look for a greater purpose in my life and look for some relief, and I started reading books for the first time in my life when I didn't have to. And I started reading just biographies about people that did crazy stuff and lived exciting lives, and that kind of led me to like Thoreau and pointed me towards philosophy and looking for some type of religion and just some type of inner peace in my own life, some clarity. And it led me right to mindfulness practices, and it just spoke really true to me in every sense. Like I already knew it somewhere deep inside. And I started reading and practicing, and not practicing too much, but just kind of dabbling into it. And then I came across an article in the Marine Corps Times while I was still in that said Marines were meditating. And I was like, what? No way. No way. It had a picture of a Marine sitting cross-legged on the cover. And everybody just kind of like looked at it and laughs. And
Pass the cigarettes.
Yeah. And so I looked up, I went to the website and went to Mind Fitness. I Googled it and found the website. And I reached out to them and just told them, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I'd like to know more about it. I'm coming up, I had like a year left on my contract at that time. And I told them if there was ever an opportunity that I could help out or maybe go through the program or something, I'd really like to be a part of it. And I had some training experience. I was a martial arts instructor and was used to training Marines. And I got in contact eventually with Dr. Liz Stanley, who started the foundation. And long story short...
What foundation was that?
The Mind Fitness Training Institute. It's a nonprofit organization that Dr. Liz Stanley, who teaches at Georgetown and was an Army officer, started a few years ago. And long story short, I found myself sitting in front of her and some other trainees and learning the program. And now I am helping out with the organization, training Marines down at Camp Pendleton in mindfulness-based techniques. And the journey has really transformed my life.
So what you started practicing on and off mindfulness, and then you started practicing more and then got into Liz Stanley's program. And then that program has some requirements as far as training that led to more practice, correct?
Correct.
So how much practice?
Before I started, I was only really doing yoga and trying some, every now and then trying a few minutes of meditation, but I wasn't really practicing very often. But when I got in touch with Mind Fitness, they said, well, if you want to do this, we're going to need you to start practicing 15 minutes a day. And we would have Skype sessions and kind of work on it, and then we raised it to 30 minutes a day, and now I'm practicing anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour a day. And I've also been required as a trainer to attend an 8-day silent retreat, which I did at the IMS Center in Barre, Massachusetts, and it was an incredible experience, a great opportunity to really slow down and look at this experience that we're living.
So how about the nightmares?
Nightmares. Well, I used to have a lot of nightmares, and it almost seemed like nightmares were worse than the real thing, which is interesting. And it disrupted my sleep a lot, and I had a lot of aversion towards the nightmares. And when I started practicing, they started going away, but the biggest change was the way that I handled it. And Dr. Liz Stanley told me when I had a nightmare to get up and sit down on a chair and feel the sensations at my contact point, at my butt and my back and my feet on the ground, and just notice the sensations in my body. And, sometimes there would be great big waves of energy and heat and tingling and shaking, but with time and as the attentional control got better and better, I was able to sit with it, bring my attention back to the body, and allow it to pass until I could go back to sleep.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's
unbelievable.
Tim.
Really terrific. And so, no drugs, no pharmaceuticals?
No. I never tried any of the pharmaceuticals that the psychologists were recommending. I just didn't really want to go that route. I think I was self-medicating with a lot of things that I didn't know were medication, maybe alcohol and bars and stuff like that. And I just slowly have been experimenting with taking away more and more of those things in my life and finding that I'm at more peace without them.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing this, because this is, I think, very big in the evolution of how we treat our veterans. And instead of the default response being, let's see how many prescription drugs we can get them on, the default response is, let's try one of these alternatives. So thank you for sharing. Rich, you got a similar story. If you could share that with us.
Yeah, similar story. It's amazing how small the world gets. I was an Army officer from, I enlisted in 1999 while I was at Clemson University with the South Carolina Army National Guard. Graduated in 2003 and went into the infantry in the Army. Went through school after school after school, ended up in Alaska, where they took America's Arctic Warriors and sent us over to the desert. I ended up crossing paths in some of the same areas that Jared was talking about. We started in Mosul in August of 2005, and then passed through the Al-Anbar province out west near Haditha, near the Syrian border, where I actually got the Marine Corps needs help often, so they task ordered me.
This has been going on for a day and a half now behind the scenes. The Army Marine thing.
No, I ended up underneath a cavalry unit who was in control from, I think, 2nd and then 5th Marine Expeditionary Force out west. And after a year of walking the streets through those two cities, my unit started to redeploy home, and we were actually the first unit extended under the president at the time. And I got one of those motivating, your country needs you speeches. You're going into Baghdad for an indefinite amount of time, and started walking the streets in Baghdad. Through all of it, I had a lot of the same experiences we were doing. We did probably 2 to 3 patrols a day for 15 and a half months. There's so many experiences that you never expect to have that even hearing other people talk about, just you come back to the memory of it. There's probably a lot of things that happened to me that I owe my hearing to, like Bose. I probably owe my life to General Dynamics and the Stryker armor that they made, and to the people who are around me. And probably the best thing I can say about the deployment was 36 people went over with me, and all of them came back. We ended up with our share of people getting hurt and wounded along the way, but everybody made it. I had no idea how numb it made me and disconnected I became from the rest of the world. I got back in 2006. I got out of the Army in 2007, moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where I've been living since. I got involved with a group that was looking to connect services for the Wisconsin Guard returning from their deployment overseas. And it happened to be one of the lead scientists on a study that was looking at PTSD. My marriage started to fall apart. I wound up in divorce. And as I went through what turned out to be just a simple 4 or 5 day course with the University of Wisconsin, it was eye-opening to me to learn, 1, what PTSD was, 2, that I had some of the symptoms and I was suffering, and 3, that I never, even today, probably would have ever asked for help.
So you went through because you were trying to help others and you wanted to see what the program was like.
Absolutely.
And what was the program?
It was a Kriya, or a power breath exercise with yoga mixed in with it. It's
called Project Welcome Home Troops?
Correct, through Project Welcome Home Troops.
And what did you do in that workshop?
Things that I would never expect to do as an Army guy. Something called the standing tree, which I still can't get right, I think. We did a lot of yoga. We did a lot of breathing. We talked about I think the 7 layers of existence. We talked about a lot of different things, but for me, it was kind of an awakening. I realized what I didn't know, and afterwards I got into Sahaj meditation and went on to an Art of Silence program, and it's just been going from there.
So what were your parents and friends and wife at the time saying about you and what you were like?
I'm very fortunate. I have an incredibly supportive family. But if I didn't know how to help myself, how would I expect anybody else to? And so they were they were supportive. They were doing what they could to ask questions, to pull information, to pull stories. But at the end of it, there was nothing really that they could do. There was just be there and try and be supportive. Afterwards, what's really hard, I missed an entire part. Through all of it, I got involved in a documentary called Free the Mind. Went over to Amsterdam for the release of it, and after watching yourself on the big screen, it's really intimidating. But the movie finished, looked at my mom, and she said to me with a little bit of a tear in her eye, "I had no idea how to help you." And they didn't. But they recognized the change when I came out the other side, and they were the first people to step forward and say, "Whatever you did, keep doing it, because it's working."
And you had an interesting hunting experience with your dad.
Yeah, I did. Good guy bonding time, right? We had our 30 seconds of an intimate moment in about a week-long hunt. We were driving out one morning, and he just kind of looked at me and said, "You're you again from 5 or 6 years." And what he was saying is, "You're back to your normal self." And that was really probably the only thing he had to say.
So that's Project Welcome Home Troops?
It is. They run a lot of different courses to try to offer alternative methods, non-pharmacological, to give people a tool to treat symptoms they may not even know they have.
Mm-hmm. So these programs are certainly ones I've been working with, but programs that you all should Google and look up, because they're very similar stories that come out of these programs, testimonials from soldiers that are very, very similar and that need help and resources so that we can scale up the kind of work that's being done here. And if the default position continues to be what it is now, we're not going to get the kind of change we've been talking about in this conference for the last few days. And before I get to Meg, because she has an amazing story as well, I think there's a great opportunity for some real jiu-jitsu here with veterans who have come back, who have been trained, and we all have spent a lot of our tax dollars to make sure that they are trained and equipped and have the skills they need to be great soldiers and Marines and airmen and women, but have been through this tough experience, but have now, through programs like this, have gained a greater awareness of life in general. And for these folks now to come back and do the MFIT program, or to be involved in Project Welcome Home Troops, or to be involved in other programs, or to go back to our schools to partner with Ali and Atman or Megan and be that role model soldier in the school with all of those skill sets, plus the awareness that comes from this kind of training, I think can be completely transformational to our country, and to come back to communities all over the country. And I think that's why this is so important for Soren to recognize, that for all of us to see this and hear this and feel this, and what the potential opportunities can be. Megan has a similar story.
Can I add on to that just before you move to Meg? She's an amazing story. But no, you're absolutely right, because every 65 minutes a veteran takes his life. And what's really interesting is the first time that we took the program even to the news, to the media, within minutes, someone who had committed or contemplated suicide in the last week was calling saying, "I want that program, I want the help." So the greatest innovation comes out of war. Look at our history. It's there, it's ready to take.
Yeah. And there is an issue with a lot of soldiers going to the VA and a lot of soldiers not going to the VA and being afraid to go to the VA. And this is a real problem. And it is not necessarily a criticism of the VA. It's just there's a certain fear of going to the VA and being labeled with post-traumatic stress and then not being able to find work. Real or imagined, this is what's happening. And these programs, I think, can be significant. And so, Meg, if you can just share with us your story that's similar, but I think in some ways significantly different.
Yeah. I'm from the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma.
Can you guys hear her okay?
Louder? Where's my mic? Oh. How about now? Good? Yeah. So I'm from the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. And in order to get out of Oklahoma, I wanted to join the Marine Corps. So I did. I was originally trained as a military police officer. I joined in 2005, and from there, things quickly escalated through and through. I ended up as a presidential security guard, so I brought it up, for President Bush during his last term in office. And I got to travel all over the world with him. But as these gentlemen have talked about combat, my experience was a little different as well as what they've shared. I experienced what they call military sexual trauma, also known as MST, and it was very difficult because when you come back from combat, you don't want to get labeled with post-traumatic stress disorder from that, but how do you tell a chain of command of all men what happened to you as a woman? You can't. My unit was 178 people, and there were 6 women, so it's less than 5%. I ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury. I've been concussed 4 times to the point of losing consciousness for more than 6 hours. The military first put me on so many medications. You know, that was their first choice for everything, was here's medicine. It got to the point where in the Marine Corps we referred to ibuprofen as Motrin. It's vitamin M because they just give it to us for everything. Medication was a very huge part of my life. They had me on tranquilizers and sedatives and everything to try and stop all the nightmares that I was having and to help me through my struggles, but none of it was working. So eventually I got discharged from the Marine Corps in 2008, so I spent 3.5 years on active duty. And when I got discharged, it was basically a downhill spiral. I fell into self-medicating with alcohol because I didn't want to take prescription drugs. I really had no idea what I was doing. It's kind of a blur. Up until I came out here to San Francisco for culinary school in 2011. And during that time, I was married, and my now ex-husband was gone on a deployment, and I decided that I didn't want to live anymore. So I was one of those veterans that wanted to take my life. So I tried to commit suicide and ended up in the hospital. And upon my discharge, I was referred to a mental health clinic. They call them the vet centers. And they put me in touch with a program here in the Bay Area called Honoring the Path of the Warrior. And that saved my life right there. Honoring the Path of the Warrior is taught by Lee Lesser, and she's a wonderful woman and one of my saviors. But she taught me sensory awareness and meditation. I had never done meditating. I've done yoga. I thought meditation was like for crazy hippies, you know? No offense. But I was wrong, so I've evolved. I learned what meditation can actually do for you, and my nightmares, stopped. Within the 5 days that I spent with Lee at a retreat for women veterans at Tassajara Zen Center, 5 days was all it took to turn my life around. I no longer was suicidal. I could function around people. It was incredible. I can't speak enough about how amazing that was. All the medications I was on, I stopped. I didn't have to take them anymore. I was actually ready to live my life again. So.
And you were having nightmares too.
Oh, yes. I would have 2 or 3 nightmares a night. I woke up a couple of times fighting my ex-husband in the middle of my sleep. I wake up crying or screaming, but now they still come and go, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. So.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a tough story to share. So, you want to plug the Stop Act here?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, since I decided to live my life, I've been doing some advocacy work for female veterans, and Congresswoman Jackie Speier, who is here in the Bay Area, has introduced the Stop Act. And the Stop Act is basically when men and women both get assaulted in the military, both, okay? So the statistic, since everyone wants numbers, is 1 in 5. And in the Marine Corps, specifically, it's 1 in 3, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, with those statistics, I'm going to give you more numbers. Approximately 18% of sexual trauma cases get reported. Of that 18%, that's about 3,500 people. Of those 3,500 people that are the rapists, only 100 of them get convicted. So the reason for that is because, as it stands now, once you are sexually assaulted, you have to report it to your chain of command. And your chain of command has all discretion on punishments, on whether they want it to go to court, whether there's even going to be a case. And that's wrong, because even what happened with my chain of command is they said they didn't want to deal with it. They just swept it under the rug like nothing ever happened. They even I had to write my own police report as a military police officer. They took pictures of all my cuts and bruises, and when it came time for the court-martial, the evidence was gone. I was not allowed to go to the hospital to get a rape kit done. So the Stop Act that Congresswoman Jackie Speier is introducing takes the convening authority away from our chain of commands and puts it to a third party. So something has to get done. It has to be investigated.
Now, I think Meg is such a good example of the courage of a Marine, and then the courage to go through everything that she went through. And then you see now, when someone like Meg gets her teeth into an issue like this, how much passion and skill and awareness and deftness she brings to that. And I think there's so much opportunity for us. So we've got a few minutes left. And Jared, one of the things I think we all think about, I grew up in Ohio, and you grew up in Virginia, Southern Virginia. There's a manliness to being a Marine, and this stuff that we talked about this week in some quarters would be seen as soft. So what do you all who have this experience and so much credibility say to someone who says, that's not for Marines?
Well, I will say that I too share that belief that Marines are tough, Marines are strong, they don't ask for help, they adapt and they overcome. And I learned that part of adapting and overcoming is learning yourself, and the ways that we try to get through to them is showing them the science and showing them how this relates to them, how it's important, how knowing your nervous system is important, to have the tools to regulate when your nervous system is activated from the fight or flight response. and how your situational awareness can improve. All of your attention can improve. It's not just about healing, it's about performance, and that's part of what we're doing at Mind Fitness, is teaching them up front so they can be more aware while they're over there. They can have the tools to, when they get back from a mission, to sit down and notice their contact point and release some of that energy, and so they're not becoming dysregulated. And then when they get home, they have the skills so they're not going through what we went through. And that's why I think it's so important, not only that we're pushing for these programs when they get back, but we're pushing for it to be integrated into the military so they have these tools before they get put into combat.
Meg, what say you?
I definitely agree. Part of the problem is one of the issues with having PTSD in general, and being a Marine or in the Army, anywhere in the military, is you get labeled as weak. And so, for one thing, it goes grossly unreported, undertreated, everything. So when you do have options like these that are proven to help and work amazingly, people are very put off by it, because in their eyes, again, that's seeking treatment for something that they don't have. But if you can present it in a way that's not, I guess, in a label, make it more interesting and more fun for them, then they do it. I have a lot of friends that I talk with now that we all meditate. We've all gone on different retreats here and there and kind of do our own thing.
You tell people in Oklahoma you're going on meditation retreats?
Yes, okay. And they look at me like I'm crazy. They call me a hippie. No.
Rich? They hit it right on. For a vet, I approach it different than someone who's in the military. For a vet, it's a simple question: do you really want to come home? Do you ever want to really come home? And then I explain some of the things that I've gone through personally and try and help them with it. For someone who's in, especially if they're in a leadership role, in a non-commissioned officer or an officer, it's you have an obligation to lead your soldiers. And we talk about personal courage, and if you don't have the personal courage to help yourself, how are you going to help them? But really, you can't get past the stigma, because culturally it is represented as something, it's a label that you carry with you. You know, the first time that we hit the news with what we had done in Wisconsin, someone came up to me and they're like, "Hey man, I'm really glad that PTSD is okay, because it can be pretty bad." And it struck me as odd. I had never looked at myself as the label, but it's the stigma that it carries with it.
Can I touch on that for a minute? Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
It's not just, within the military that there's a stigma about it. Civilians as a whole, like our society, the news, the media, everybody shows that, oh, there's a veteran who's got PTSD who went on a rampage and hurt so many people. That's not PTSD. Having PTSD doesn't make us crazy. It's not a disorder. We are ordinary people, have been through extraordinary events, and we are reacting accordingly. That's it.
So, you each get 30 seconds, and I'm going to say one word, and you got to tell me what you're thinking. No, I'm just kidding. You each get 30 seconds, and I want you to speak directly to a fellow soldier or Marine that may be listening, and in 30 seconds tell them why they should find one of these programs to help them.
If you don't think that you need help, help yourself, because helping yourself is going to help the guys that you serve with, the guys that you're watching their back. And even though you can't control everything, there is going to be that time when you're tired and you don't have much strength left, and you're going to need to turn inside for a little bit of extra help. And having these tools available is not only could save your life, but it could save all of your guys' lives, and then it can save everybody's life that they touch.
Meg, you go ahead. Rich needs more time.
Okay.
I do.
All right, 30 seconds. What I would say to fellow veterans and Marines watching is, when you finally come to the place within yourself, when you hit rock bottom, when you figure out that the prescriptions aren't working, the docs and the therapy, it's there, but it's not helping. Have hope, because there is love and there is peace, and it is attainable. You have to practice.
So I'd put the two of them on speed dial and I'd give them my 30 seconds. Unless you want the traditional, and I may offend some people, unless you want the traditional couch and cry session, unless you want to be treated with medication, go and experience it. Try it for 4 hours. Give it 4 hours of your time. And if it doesn't work, then come back and tell me why it didn't work. But until you're willing to try yourself, there's nothing that anybody can do to help bring you back. And then, so what I've found most effective that actually works is everything that you do in the military, you do it with a buddy. If you need a buddy, call me. I'll go through it with you.
All right. And that's how you ended up at the Art of Silence retreat?
That's how I ended at the Art of Silence retreat. You're absolutely right. Fellow Marine friend. See, I have friends that are Marines. They called me. He called me and said, hey, we were talking about it a little bit, and he said, hey, I'm going through it. And I said, all right, well, if you're going to try it, I guess I'll try it too. Let's do it. And then it's incredibly painful to sit quiet for days on end. And it was the strength of looking at each other and just seeing the sheer terror in his eyes looking back at me as I'm looking at him.
It's great. These guys are the best. I mean, there's no doubt about it. To think about American sons and daughters. And I just wanted to, lastly, as we close, say, if you get killed in action, in most of our communities, there is a big service, there's a parade, there's a story on the front page of the local newspaper in color. There's a story about the kids and the family that's left behind. And when someone comes home for 6 months or a year and has post-traumatic stress, they are quietly buried, and there's they're in the obit section with the rest of us. And one of the things that I'm going to start and am in the process of starting, with the help of Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock and others, is a Veterans Corps, in which we will try to raise money to get vets like this trained in therapies like this, to go out into the world and social media in small towns all over the country to be able to connect with vets, and then to train them in Yoga Nidra or iRest or Project Welcome Home Troops or any of these other techniques that can help them. Because, as I said, those vets won't go to the VA. And just imagine 100, 1,000, 5,000 of men and women like this out in communities connecting with that suffering that's out there. And that's the compassion and action that I think Marianne was just talking about and that we all are talking about. And if we can join the resources that are here in Silicon Valley and the resources that are around the country, tap into the training and the skills and the courage of these soldiers on and off the battlefield, imagine the transformation that could happen in this country. So thank you. You guys
and the world
are the best. Great job.